of those pharmaceuticals rather than on just one study for one particular cohort of the public. They look at all the studies and reach a conclusion.
Okay, but that's not helping me to get a picture of this beyond what I've seen so far. I'm asking specific questions of where we would determine that we have the source of pollution. You know, it's one thing to say that our buffers aren't sufficient, but the next thing is where's the source? Is it point source, or where where's it coming from? And I mean, is there any apparent damage that we've had? Have we got pig farms that are too close to the buffer, or is it a ditch next to the elementary school that ends up running down into a wetland on Lopez, or what's causing it? Because I'd like to see that to help.
Yeah, well, we don't have the field monitoring data to indicate that, to indicate specific sources. Island County has done that sort of thing, but we don't have it, at least not yet in San Juan County. So we can only talk about potential sources, and there are a number of potential sources in San Juan County. They could be septic systems that have not been recently inspected and maybe starting to fail, but maybe not obviously failing yet. They could be people putting fertilizers on their lawns, unseen and unmonitored by anybody else. There could be, horses and other animals, including wildlife even, that could be introducing nitrates. Nitrates themselves are not the only problem, however. Nitrates are just they're a soluble pollutant, and there are hundreds of other soluble pollutants that are getting, potentially are used in the county and potentially are getting into our groundwater and surface waters, but we have no data on those other chemicals. So I wouldn't say, well, just either we do or we don't have sources of nitrate. It's much more than just nitrate.
I understand that then better, but what concerns me a lot about this is protecting from potential. But I've lived here almost my whole life. I've lived in Washington State my whole life, and what I've seen is a much lighter touch on the land, especially in the last 15 years. And what disturbs me a lot in this whole process now is that we're ramping up and expanding buffers, saying what we had before was not sufficient. Well, I know from being a land user and being a logger and farmer and contractor, what I see happening here is much more benign than it has been, and likewise with the rest of Washington State. And I'd really rather not put everybody's area of property on the shelf in the absence of knowing where the pollution, whether it exists. I absolutely, totally understand that a large expansion of a buffer is certainly going to do a better job of protecting something that could land on the ground and go into the resource. But do we have existence of that? And as a member of public, I've not seen that, and it's not running around town in the circles I run with anyway, in where it's coming from.
Yeah, it would be very useful to have monitoring data that showed one way or the other whether there is a problem. But obtaining that data, one would have to monitor not just 5 or 6 pollutants or potential pollutants, but literally hundreds of potential pollutants. And that quickly gets to be an expensive proposition because not all of those pollutants move at the same rate. Some might take years until they hit the estuaries or the shoreline, whereas other pollutants would hit the shoreline almost as soon as they're applied to the land or septic systems. So there can be long time lags between the time a pollutant is introduced and between when it's detected.
Paul, you've really hit the nail on the head for me right there. We've only been using this land for 150 years around here. We have been done unregulated. I mean, I remember they oiled the roads to keep the dust down. We don't do that anymore. We have, if this resides in the ground, if the pollution resides in the ground, we ought to be able to find it. And I think it's just absolutely a piece that's missing in this, that's fundamental to it. And we hear that it's expensive, but it's expensive for who? It's expensive for each and every one of us citizens when somebody just makes an assumption without all of the legs on the stool to hold up that assumption. And that is where I think that we need to go further with proving that. I think it's one thing to build a high fence and keep all your cattle out, but if you don't have any cattle in the field, there's no need for it.
Susan was next with a question.
Yeah, my question was, we have this Dr. Adamus, we have a bunch of comments here from Rosewood Environmental Services, and several of them deal with changing in some way the definitions of high and medium importance for wetlands in terms of both the size and you know, kind of specifically what's there. How absolute do you feel wedded to the size and the activity or the definitional criteria for high and medium wetlands in the draft ordinance?
I looked at Scott's memo just about an hour ago for the first time, and I think he's got some useful suggestions in there. I don't agree with all of them, but I think in response to your question, I think size criteria for some of the high importance wetlands is something that there can be some flexibility on because the science isn't as perfect as we would like on that. So I like some of his suggestions, for example, on aspen cottonwood wetlands, that we, rather than just any wetland with more than 5 trees of aspen cottonwood, that we have, you know, if let's say it's more than a half acre, then it goes in the high category. If it's a quarter to a half acre, it goes into the medium category, and if it's less than a quarter acre, maybe of aspen cottonwoods, that it not be considered a important wetland.
He suggested the same thing for mature forested wetland as well as aspen cottonwood. Does that seem okay to you too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have to go through them
Yeah.
one at a time
Right.
and give that some thought and reply on it. But the concept that he puts out there, I am in agreement with, that we could scale it by the size of these areas.
Thank you. And one more question. We've heard it mentioned that most wetlands in the county are low importance. Is that true in your opinion?
It is, well, the term importance, you know, it's got a lot of connotations to a lot of people.
But it's in the code. It's in the draft.
I don't, you know, personally, I don't consider the wetlands to be low important or unimportant or anything like that. It's just, it happens to be a term that we had to use to denote the lowest category in terms of regulation. But whether I think those are unimportant wetlands, no, I don't.
No, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean to say that they were unimportant, but I meant that would the majority of the acreage, which is wetland, meet the definition of low importance per the draft ordinance?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I do believe that is going to be the case. I don't have statistics to prove it, but I do believe that's the case.
Thank you.
Of course, nonetheless, some of those low wetlands could have large buffers if the development intensity that's being proposed is severe.
Right.
Barbara?
Oh, following up on your comments that you had just read Scott Rosenbaum's response this morning, what would be your timing for giving us recommendations vis-a-vis his response? Because we're going to be going into deliberations, and it would be nice to have an evaluation of his comments from you before we made some final recommendations to the council.
Okay, well, I could do that when we call back in a couple of hours if you would like.
That would be terrific. I don't think we could ask for a more responsive operation, so yes, thank you.
Yeah, I would prefer to put it in email, but I could phone it in a few hours when we talk again.
Wait, assuming that we're not going to finish deliberations and make our final recommendation today, we are meeting again, Shereen,
27, 28,
on
28.
the 28th, presumably to, finish up our consideration and make our recommendations, this document. So maybe it would be reasonable to have your comments several days before that. And then we
Yeah, I would appreciate having more time. I wasn't sure what your schedule was for reconvening things, and deliberating, but that would be, give me more time to really ponder his comments.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Adamus, you mentioned Whidbey Island or Island County had a monitoring program for wetlands. Could you kind of expand a little bit on what they did, what was involved there?
Yes, I have not been in touch with them recently, but in 2007, they instituted a monitoring program measuring the water quality, not just in wetlands, but in streams throughout the county. And they did that for two reasons. One was to identify what the natural background concentrations were, both in streams that were, flowing through preserves and basically unaltered land, as opposed to streams in wetlands that were in situations with a lot of apparent disturbance around them. So they were able to develop some baseline values for different scenarios. The second purpose of the monitoring program was for source identification. That is, where they found a